We have 60 people. Maybe we can start now. Dave, Shachar, are you ready for this?
Yeah, very ready.
Cool. Perfect. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Digital Success Breakfast. This is the last of the season, the last of 2020. Thanks for joining early in the morning. My name is Alex Finalbertini. I'm part of the Customer Success Network. And today I'm with Dave, Jessup, and Shachar Avrahami, and they're going to talk about customer health scores. Before we start, just a few things. If you want to put your camera on, that will be amazing for our panelists. Don't forget to join Slido if you want to ask questions during the interview. The Slido app, and this is hashtag CSM Breakfast. By the end of the interview, we'll go through the questions and we will have a 15-minute live Q&A. Now let's kick off, and I will ask probably Dave and Shachar to introduce themselves to us very quickly. Thank you so much for joining. Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Super glad to be here with you all today. I'm a success director at Sprinklr. If you've not heard of us before, our mission in a nutshell is to transform the way enterprises deliver customer experiences. We provide a unified platform for care, marketing, research, advertising, and social engagement. It's been about 7 months at Sprinklr now, and I lead a team of success managers in driving value across our North European book of business. So yeah, really wonderful to be with you all today.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thanks. Shachar?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shachar. I live in Tel Aviv, Israel. I'm a product manager at a small company called EverAfter, and we build a product for customer success to help them to build customer portals for their customers. Before I joined EverAfter, I did customer success operation roles in 2 companies. So all of the health score and how to understand better the customer is something that I'm extremely passionate about.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen and we will kick off now. So my first question to you, Dave, is, and to you both, but I will start with Dave. Why do you think customer health score are important, and what are they meant to achieve?
Yeah, for me, it's 2 key things, really. Firstly, I think they really help provide definition for how our success teams should be managing their book of business, to help identify risk, to help identify growth opportunities, and ultimately provide a benchmark to bring together our leading indicators into something that's a little bit more tangible and a bit more meaningful. Secondly, for us at Sprinklr, it gives really great visibility to the executive leadership team and also the senior leadership team of where they might need to invest resources, and also gives them confidence and reassurance and maybe insight into the overall state of the business. So those are the 2 key things for me.
Good. What about you, Shachar? What do you think?
So from a customer success operations perspective, my main goals for building a successful customer health score, first, to be able to predict better how our customers are doing. And once we identify something, to be able to prioritize for the CSMs which account they should speak and why. So prioritization and prediction will be my main goals for customer health score.
Good. The second thing I have for you both is something that I discussed with another CSM about this model and about the health score that you built. Is it a one-fits-for-all model, or is it do you apply different health scores depending on your segmentation, your customer segmentation, or depending on the maturity of your customers? How does it work? Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can do. Thank you. It's a really good question, and I think it's probably worth scene setting that we've recently revamped our health score at Sprinklr, and we are still fairly in the early stages. The team are using it, but we're essentially sort of around enablement time. We do have a one-size-fits-all for every customer. We do that because we believe that the factors of the health score can apply to every single customer in our customer base. It then kind of ensures that every success manager uses consistent language and approaches health score in the same way. I would say that we layer in additional frameworks or cadence depending on the size of the customer, and we're going through an additional segmentation piece right now. And I think as we move forward, I would like to see us consider our global strategic accounts, for example, whether it's also the right fit for those. If you have a different cadence or a more intense cadence, my personal opinion is that I think it's something we should revisit, because I think there's an opportunity to apply some slightly different quantifiables to the health score to drive better results through certain segments of customers, but we don't do that today.
Okay, good. Shahar, what do you think about that? The one fits for all model, or different health scores depending on the customer journey map?
So for me, as an agenda on customer health score, simple is better. So unless you have a really good reason to build different health score, try to build something that will fit for all. But I think that onboarding and ongoing might look different when you calculate health score, because the cadences might be different and you need to measure them pretty differently. And if you have different products or different touch models, then maybe you need to separate it. Maybe you can define a specific metric inside the overall health score that will be different based on the tier, but you need to find something that will be simple to understand and simple to work upon.
Okay, simple. Dave, so you started mentioning how it works at Sprinklr. Do you want to talk us through how you measure health score for your enterprise accounts at Sprinklr?
Yeah, I will do. I'll try and keep this as straightforward as possible, because I'll use some weird Sprinklr language. But it's the health score itself is fairly simple in that we have a standard red, amber, green score out of 100. It is built into our own platform. So our health score is built into Sprinklr. We used to use Gainsight, but we transitioned to our own platform for all of the similar activities you'd pursue in Gainsight, and our health score lives there. The health score itself is constructed of 3 different parts. The first of those 3 is relationship. That's a score from 0 to 100, and that's based around the number of interactions that the success manager has had with that customer in the last 30 days. We also take into account for relationship something called a chi score. A chi score to us is a customer happiness index. Once a quarter, sometimes a little bit more frequently for larger customers, we will ask a customer directly, how happy are you with your service at Sprinklr? We then take that score and feed that into Sprinklr, and previously would have fed that into Gainsight. And so we measure that score as well as the compliance of taking that score to make sure that we're robustly taking it. And then a third part of the relationship piece is that we also make sure that we have identified champions, economic buyers, and exec sponsors. So those 3 things feed into the relationship pillar. The second thing we track is consumption. Again, a score from 0 to 100. That's allocated based on product consumption. Sprinklr as a whole is built upon 5 core products, and we have a consumption index that weights the consumption and adoption of those products against the ARR attached to each of the products. So that score out of 100 then feeds in as the second pillar. And finally, we track value, and that again is a score from 0 to 100. We build that based on something called our PBUC data. So for Sprinklr, we tie the use cases of our product quite neatly back to roughly 45 individual positive business use cases. And so the SM, when they first meet a customer after implementation or throughout the lifecycle of a customer, will sit down with a customer, go through those use cases that were identified through pre-sales or post-sales, map that out, and make sure that we have identifiable value attached to each of those use cases. If we complete everything we can, or if we don't, that then feeds into that score of 0 to 100. So we have those 3 0 to 100s feed into the primary score, and then we can track that over time, or we can kind of deep dive the health score and figure out individual pieces. But as I said, the health score itself is a red, amber, green 0 to 100, and it's built of those component parts.
Okay, straightforward. So you said relationship, consumption, and value, and we'll talk about weight afterwards. But before that, so Shahar, another question is, how do you move away from, at the beginning, maybe a sentiment model around relationship with your accounts to a more predictive model?
So actually, the reason that we started to try and think about an objective health score was when we expanded from 1 team in 1 office to 3 teams in 3 different locations. And we understood that we need to have something that we can compare between the teams, or when one CSM from 1 office says that this customer is at risk, is it the same risk that the CSM from a different location? So we need to have like a benchmark. And I think that the benefits of moving from a manual process to a more objective measurement is that the data can help you to better understand your customers with different trends. And when you look at the things on the macro level, it's much you have more data to rely on. So that's why we wanted to move from this subjective to the more automated or more objective measurements.
Okay, and you mentioned that the key goal, it's to prioritize and also to predict churn. Do you have any North Star metric or key KPIs you want to share about how to predict churn?
So I think that the actual metric will be different between different companies and different products. But when I try to understand what metrics I want to look at, I look at four main dimensions. The first dimension is the awareness. Do I have the ability to understand how the customer is doing? The second one will be the relationship. What is the outcome of the relationship? What is the frequency that we speak at? And the third and the four are based on usage. I call it usage of scale and usage of scope. I want to measure how deep is the customer invested in my platform, but I also want to measure how wide is the customer use case with our platform. So those are the four dimensions that I try to understand the exact metrics that will be relevant for my organization and my communication with the customers.
Okay. So Dave, if we go back to the three dimensions you were looking at, specifically around the product usage and relationship, how do you weight those two?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I probably alluded to with the scoring, and they're weighted evenly. So we measure relationship and the more definable metrics equally. But as an organization and probably culturally, we typically lead with consumption and adoption because it's easier to define and easy to identify any potential gaps. We've recently built some additional adoption and consumption dashboards that have that consumption index because, like I said, we have 5 products and it weights against ARR. So if you spend more on a part of the product, that contributes more to your consumption. We have quite a lot of data at Sprinklr that we can leverage. And I think it's super important to make sure that you have the right contacts and champions. And I think as we try and push further with our health score, we will need to find a way to include the fact that we always want to test our contacts. So if we think someone's a champion, how do we actually test that over time? And how do we make sure they're still a champion? And I think over time, we'll probably need to build something in that probably has some extra weighting against relationship. But today they're even, but as an organization, we typically lead with consumption adoption because it's just a lot easier to define. And it's a more common language that's easier for the rest of the organization outside of success to understand. Okay.
So we're talking about health scores and metrics and some kind of red and green and red flags. So question for you, Shah, because you worked in customer operation, is about, so when there is a red flag or when there is a bad score, what are the follow-up actions that you put in place for the CS team and you can think of and you want to share with us?
Sure. So if I'm looking at the second goal, which will be the prioritization, then every time that we identify a red flag, as you said, we can offer the CSM what we believe the best practice should be in order to make this red flag green again. So and it could be automated processes or manual processes. For example, one of our red flags was when customer didn't log into our platform for more than 14 days. And we automated like a reach out from the CSM. It was a very simple email. Hey, I saw that you haven't logged in for a while. Can I help with something? And we saw that 70% of the customers that got this email actually logged in the day after, which is a win for all, because we identify something that maybe the CSM would need to spend more time to identify. So we identified, and then we offered like an automated CTA in this case. In some cases, it could be like manual. I can offer the CSM, and those are the best practices as other CSM do, and then they eventually can decide if they want to follow this or not. But it's to learn from best practices and to give what we believe the best approach on every parameter.
So there were emails. Follow-up action was an email. Were there also for key accounts sometimes a call, some kind of escalation process? Do you want to talk us through this?
So yes, so it could be either email, reach out. If we identify that the CSM didn't have a meeting for a while, then the best practice would be to suggest the CSM to schedule an email with a call with the customer. I have to say that also for positive criteria, we can trigger best practices. Mm-hmm. So we had like an upsell lead mechanism that when we felt that there is a nice upsell candidate, we triggered an email to the CSM or an alert to the CSM, and then they could decide if they want to convert it to an opportunity or not. So it's not only on the red flags, it's also on the green flags.
Okay, good. So Dave, about these scores, are they supposed to be internal only, or should we share sometimes some scores with the customers to maybe drive changes with the customers?
Yeah, this is such a tough one, because most times when I meet a customer, whenever we start talking about metrics or there's some sort of benchmark, customers are super passionate about and understanding how their adoption compares with either their competitors, people in their industry, or they're just very curious about how their performance kind of tallies up against other people's. So I do think there's definitely a place for some sort of measure of your customers' sophistication of their adoption. But I don't necessarily know that the way we talk about health scores internally is something you could apply to a customer. I don't think that sort of the success-led internal health score should be customer-facing, because I think if it is customer-facing, it might not be fit for purpose. We at Sprinklr, for example, with our health scores, in the way that we measure and talk about key relationships, we would talk and test those relationships using language I wouldn't be comfortable exposing to a customer. So I love the idea of sophistication indexes, or a way to demonstrate to a customer, this is how you compare to your peers, because I think it can help identify or gain some traction if you need to get buy-in for something specific. If you really need to drive on a particular feature or function, or you need to drive in a specific area, it really helps get buy-in for that. But I think there would have to be a lot of work done to customize the internal health score to make it ready to be customer facing, based on the way we've built ours, for example.
Okay. So Shah, once we have built some health scores, it can be very simple. Let's start with 1 or 2 and think about call to actions after these scores. But how do you know that you're tracking the right metrics, and how often do you monitor or change the health scores?
First, I have to say that I think that all of us need to understand that health score, it's not something that you set it and forget it. It's something that you need to constantly monitor and make sure that it actually gives you the right result, because your company changes, your product changes, and your customer changes. So you need to be on top of the things and make sure that the health score that you built 2 years ago are still relevant to these days. So what we did when we released the first version of the health score, we tried to define like efficiency metrics that will help us understand if we're actually achieving the goal, which we to better predict and better to prioritize. So in my opinion, a successful health score need to be measured by the hit rate. Can we identify churn? Do we identify the churn? Aging, how long in advance we can identify potential churn? Subjective versus objective. So eventually I want that my objective measurement, which will be more data driven based on actual usage, based on open rate of emails, login, will be more predictive than the subjective measurements. And the last one is the false alarms. I want to make sure that I'm not saying on good accounts that they are going to churn. So the combination of the 4, and you need to set up goals, and you need to measure it over time and set up more aggressive goals. If you achieve good scores in these 4, in my opinion, you have a successful health score.
Okay, and you mentioned that it's key to monitor on a regular basis where you are. Is it a quarterly maybe review of the health scores? How did you achieve that?
So when we release a new version of the health score, usually it was between 3 to 6 months, unless you have enough data before. The other thing that I want to say, don't let one account that doesn't fit to your health score impact the actual health score. You need to have a data-driven approach. You will always have like one or two accounts that don't fall under the criteria, but you need to have enough data to make a right decision.
Good, thanks. So Dave, you've built a customer health score model at Sprinklr. Could you share with us the lessons you've learned, the mistake you've made, and the things that you would have done differently?
Yeah, sure. I think just as an overall observation, the hardest part, as everybody on this call will know, has been the change management piece for everybody in the organization. Success managers kind of live and breathe this data, and so they adopt and they will understand. But the hard part has been instilling a culture of health and the language we use throughout the rest of the organization, through sales, through services, through support. And we try and distill churn, health, or growth into 4 very simple buckets. And that's language we use in terms of value, adoption, relationship, and product. And that's consistent across the organization. So something that we are going to continue to do is try and make sure that when we talk about health, it relates to one of those 4 buckets. So if we're talking to an AE or a sales counterpart and we're trying to get them to understand why the health score is important, we can tie that back to some more common language around, well, this health score indicates growth, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I've learned from the iteration of the health score that we've gone through is that you do need to leave a little room for either healthy skepticism or a little bit of hopeful optimism, because just because a health score, and Shachar kind of alluded to this as well, just because it flashes green doesn't mean that that customer is going to 100% renew and they're super successful. And I think you have to go and approach that with a little bit of skepticism. And that's something I think I'd like to instill across my team and the rest of the success organization. And I think it applies to if a customer has a red health score as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that instantly they are going to churn, but this should be a signpost or a guide for you to approach an account with a mentality that will help drive success. And that for me is crucial, and something that I think as we mature through this iteration of our health score, I'd like to see us do is figure out ways that we can build in or bake in just either a little bit of success manager sentiment without them having to go and tick a box or tick a sentiment every month or something like that, but just a way to build some of that in. And I think the thing that I've learned that has been crucial is not to let the data kind of fool you into a false sense of security. I'm sure everyone will know this. Everybody's had a customer where they seem super healthy, they tell you all the right things, adoption is incredible, and then you find something that you just can't track through a health score. Maybe a competitor comes in and undercuts you on price. There are things that you just can't track. So I think taking that as a guide and leveraging it to drive powerful success, but not taking that data just as the be all and end all for a customer relationship.
Yeah, you can't predict everything, can you? So Dave mentioned the fact that he works in a quite data-driven. You've got a lot of data, Dave. You mentioned that, and that's a great thing. But sometimes you don't have a lot of data. So the question is, how do you approach customer health scores with limited data and maybe an in-house built CRM? Where do you start? How do you start?
I mean, yeah, if you don't have a lot of data, and I think we as a group have talked about this a few times, but there's always some level of data. I think you can always get something, whether that's something you build in an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's something you take from support cases or from somewhere. There's always going to be an elemental amount of data you can pull from your interactions. And I think you have to do the best with what you've got. Take that data and build it into something. It might not be the most sophisticated thing you've ever seen, but as I described through the health score we've built at Sprinklr, the component parts that make that health score are fairly simple things to track. Some of them can be controlled just by having the SM identify the right relationships. So you could build that health score in a more simple manner. It doesn't necessarily need to be something overly complex built into a platform like Sprinklr. It could be something as simple as an Excel sheet.
Okay, good. Shah, what do you think?
So I definitely agree. I think that eventually all of the tools, and even Salesforce is another way, is a more complicated way of using Excel. So I think that even if you don't have a fancy tool and you don't have like all of the resources to implement such tool, you need to start with an Excel spreadsheet and put all of the criteria that you want and able to measure with about your customers. It could be, when was the last time you had a conversation with them? When was the last time your customer logged in? And even if you update it on a weekly basis, it will give you something to start. And once you prove value on this Excel sheet, maybe you will get more resources to make it more sophisticated and to get more activities and events on your system. But you should definitely start with something. And remember, every time you release a better version of the health score, version 1 will not be the same or as good as version 5, but you need to start with something. That's, I think, even if it's on-prem, I would say.
Good. So Dave, you mentioned a spreadsheet to start with. I think you mentioned also Gainsight, and now you've got your in-house, I think, tool. Any tool you would recommend for our attendees?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I have used a few different iterations of health scores in different tools, and like I said, we're using now Sprinklr itself, our platform. To be honest, I've found them mostly the same. My opinion is that whatever tool you do choose just needs to be malleable. You really need to be able to fit the unique points of your business into the tool you choose to use, whether that's your industry, your kind of customer persona, or something different. One of the reasons we did build our own is that we have that ability to make really quick changes based on feedback from people in the teams, leadership, or even our customers. And it means that we can make those tweaks very quickly. And we can also take the rich data we have in our platform and feed that directly into a health score. So most tools that I've seen allow you to do those things. And to me, the health score is a tool that the success managers can leverage to really drive value and strive to do better with our customers. So as long as you have something that you have the ability to make fit your business, I think most of the tools I've seen are very much the same.
Good. And this is going to be my last question, because we've got lots of questions in Slido and lots of attendees. I would like to allow time for you guys, all of you who've joined today. So the last one for you both. So I'll start with Shah. We mentioned change management and the fact that change management and data-driven approach. So how do you have any tips on how to change and drive change management internally?
So when I convinced my chief customer officer that all of our weekly team meetings will be filtered based on the customer health score, we reviewed the poor and then the average and then the good. I think this is what drove the most change in the way that we approach the health score, because once this was the thing that we first look at when we wake up in the morning and we access we use Tango or Salesforce. It means that all of the team needs to act upon the health score. And of course, if you prove that the KPIs that you're measuring on your health score are right, then it helps to convince the team that they can trust the health score. It's all about the team needs to feel that they can trust the criteria that I put. So I try to work with them and defining the criteria. So it will not be something that only CS operations decide, which I didn't speak with the customer. So I have to have their feedback and their opinion incorporated into the health score. And again, it's a process. You won't be able to convince everyone to rely on your health score from day one. It's a process that you need to decide that you're going to start and work with.
Dave, what's your take on change management internally?
Yeah, it is possibly the hardest part. And I think we provide our success managers and the rest of the organization a lot of tools, and we move very quickly when we build new tool sets. So it can be tough to move at pace. I think as we've rolled out a new health score that relates to a new consumption adoption dashboard, and we have new value realization dashboards, the key thing for us is helping everybody understand why this is important. And I think we're taking the data that we've got. So where we might have flagged someone who had red health 6 months ago, and taking that data and turning it into an anecdotal story of this customer was clearly a risk. We might have missed it if we'd not had this rich data identifying senior relationships were missing. We took that data and went and approached the senior leadership team at that customer and built better sponsorship. And now we've gone through this successful renewal, successful growth period, and we can now demonstrate the change and that future data and say, well, this is where it was, these are the actions we took, and this is where we're at today. And those sort of anecdotal stories backed up by data will hopefully convince anyone who might not be fully on board with health scores that we need to keep investing time and energy into this, and that the account teams as a whole need to be aligned on why this is important.
Alignment. Okay, good. Thanks for sharing, Dave. Dave, Shah, are you ready for the live Q&A? I will share my screen now. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. So the first question is, what metrics data did you look at to establish the first iteration of your health score? Oops, sorry. Goes away. Did you have time to look at it?
I think I can remember it. I mean, I kind of talked through what makes up the health score that we have today. I think we've just gotten more sophisticated. The previous or first iterations of health scores I've seen took mostly usage and adoption, but they weren't weighted. So they didn't really depend on the ARR. They were purely a measure of how much was deployed. So if a customer invested $100 in product A and 10,000 in product B, we would weight them 50-50, which is not the case now. So our basic health score was based on adoption, and then we would have the SM input something in relationship. So we need to have a senior sponsor, we need to have a champion, and we need to have an economic buyer, and the SM would manually say high, medium, or low engagement. And we would feed that into a more basic health score. That was roughly what the first iteration looked like before we got a little bit more sophisticated.
Good. The next one from Angela is for Shachar. How do you identify the component of the health score that is putting the account in red so you set up follow-ups? How to drill down,
So I think that on one hand, you need to think, how do you believe your customers should interact with your company? But on the other hand, you need to look at how the actual customers are, the successful customers that are renewing are engaging with your platform. And then again, if you have, if you're going in the direction for 4 dimensions, awareness, relationship, user scale, and usage of scope. So you need to think, what is the cadence that I want to apply with my customers? Do I want to speak with them on a monthly basis? Do I want to speak with them on a weekly basis? And based on that, you can define the ranges. So for example, if you think that you need to have a monthly call with a customer, and then it's been 2 months and you didn't have a call with them, then it's a red flag that you need to alert the CSM to do something upon it. So it's what you believe that your customers should get, but also how the actual customers are, the successful customers are interacting. And again, you need to monitor and improve it over time. And involve the CSMs because they know the best how to interact with the customers. Me as a CS operations, I'm not speaking with customers, so I have to rely on their feedback to incorporate it to the health score.
Good. Next one. So any great ideas for measurable health score metrics in a self-serve product with little account management with the team? What has worked well? I'll also take this one.
So I can answer this one. I think that in this case, it will be more of a one-to-many communication approach. So maybe identifying open rate of email campaigns or login in this way. Maybe I would put more focus on the usage, support tickets. Support tickets, I have to say, it might be the fact that the customer opens many support tickets doesn't mean that necessarily it's a bad sign. It might be a good sign that they are interacting with the software. So NPS, this is also something that might be helpful. There are ways of a self-serve product. Mostly it will be on usage in my opinion.
Good usage then. And How accurate is your health score at predicting churn?
I would love to back this up with some sort of data, but I don't have anything off the top of my head. I would say, generally speaking, based on the things we track, that if we flag an account as red, it's because we're missing something. It might not necessarily mean that that customer is going to churn, but for me, it means that we haven't got the full picture that we believe we need to make that customer successful. If their adoption is very poor and they're weeks or months away from a renewal, then that's obviously a red flag. And I think it's a clear sign that there's more churn risk. And I think that's the key thing for me. To me, the lower the health score, the more at risk that customer is. But it's a very good point, and something that I'll definitely think about with the rest of the team is how we leverage that and track it back to predicted churn.
What about you, Shar? Do you remember when you implemented this? Could you say how accurate it was?
Yeah, if I can share my screen for a second, I actually have a slide.
Can you? I'll stop
Do you see
sharing.
my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Thanks
as I said, we measured. When I work at FeedVisor, we measured 4 KPIs: hits, aging, automation, and false alarms. And here, this was the first version. So for example, we improved from 81% of identifying customers, the churn, to 100%. I think that the thing that I'm most proud of was the aging. So we started at the beginning, we only identified 55% of the churns at least 4 weeks before. And after 4 quarters, we got to 88%, meaning that 88% of the customers that churn, we identified them at least 10 weeks before. And also the automation, we improved from 50% to 95%, meaning that 95% of the cases, the automated health score identified before the CSM. And the false alarm, we improved from 36% to only 9%.
Wow.
And the fifth layer would be, this is not with actual numbers, but this is the trend of the churn. So we actually were able to improve the churn rate from here to here. So it was a significant, overall, we want to improve the churn. So this proved that we actually was able to improve the.
Good, super valuable. Thanks for sharing. I share my screen now for the next one. So next question. So I like the 4 buckets you mentioned: adoption, relationship, value, churn. So that's for Dave. Can you share how you measure value?
Yeah, they ultimately tie together. The way that we communicate and talk about value at Sprinklr is that we build value realization dashboards in our product, and they take a few things into account. So they take, as I mentioned earlier, we have very defined use cases. So it would take, say, positive business use case number 25 of the 45 we have, which might be an automation or approval use case. You would then take that, and we know industry standard that Sprinklr used for approvals will make that individual's work 5 minutes faster per approval, for example. So we would then take that and build out a value denomination based on, if that person does 1,000 approvals, they'd say 5,000 minutes, the average salary of that person's role would be X. So we can communicate that in terms of a dollar amount. So the way we measure value ultimately is we take the data that we've got from the use cases we know our customers use, and we can take that data in platform and ultimately turn that into one of 3 things. Either have we increased that customer's revenue, have we reduced that customer's churn, or have we helped them mitigate brand risk? And we take all of that and can communicate that in either time saving or a dollar amount. And that's typically how we track and measure value at Sprinklr. Hopefully that answers the question, Miriam.
Then a question from Phil, which is, do you differentiate between feedback direct from customers, survey, conversation, to indirect usage data, feature growth, so hard versus soft score?
I talked about this a little bit earlier when I talked about how our score is made. We don't weight them differently. So we don't necessarily differentiate in the sense that we would consider one or more or less than the other. But like I talked about, we do take that direct feedback from customers. We don't survey them, but we do have the success manager in the team ask them typically once a quarter, how happy are you with Sprinklr? And we input that score out of 10 into our internal systems, and that then feeds into the health score and feeds into other things. So we directly ask customers that question.
Good. Shai, anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah.
Hard versus soft score.
Yeah, so we used to send an NPS survey after 3 months and 3 months before renewal. If we got a negative score, it did impact the health score, but not for permanent. So actually the action items that the CSM had to do was to have a follow-up conversation with the customer, because sometimes it could be something specific that the customer experienced, and once the CSM verified it with the customer, we would remove the red flag. I just want to say regarding NPS, sometimes we forget about the non-responsive ones, and we found in FeedVisor that there was a higher correlation between I didn't respond and I churn, rather than I respond between 0 to 6 and I churn. So the ones that are more numb is more at risk based on our statistics that we found.
Good. I think the next one we talked about a little bit about if you evolve it bit by bit or if you deployed one ago. Shai, do you want to follow up on this one? I think you touched upon that.
Yeah, it's like when you build a product. Don't wait until the product will be 100% perfect. You need to release something, and then based on the feedback to reiterate and improve. So my advice is don't wait until you have the comprehensive solution. Start with something, and based on the feedback, improve and improve it.
Good. The next one. So Dave, you mentioned that it's even at Sprinklr. Between sentiment and measurable metrics. Shai, is it the same in your previous companies? Did you what those two even? So
my personal goal was to have 100% measurable and 0% sentiment. But this is as an operation. Speaking. Yeah, this is a CS ops. I wanted to be ahead of the CSMs, because then we can compare it better. So this is a CS operations point of view. Okay.
Any suggestion on how to advise a score for multi-product customers? That's something that you faced.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Our product is multi-product. We have 5 core products. A customer might have 1 or they might have 5. I think ultimately the way it feeds into the health score is going to be roughly the same, but the key thing for us that has been really helpful lately and how we talk and track consumption and adoption is weighting the product by ARR. So if a customer has 10 seats of one product and 10 seats of another, obviously the ARR is going to be super important. 10 seats of something at 100K are going to be worth far more than 10 seats of something for 5K. So for multi-product, it's been super helpful for us to be able to weight that. And there are some pretty simple calculations to drill that down to the individual dollar. But that's very helpful, because then the way we talk about our consumption index, which is the overall index of all the products a customer has, is weighted accurately, and we're not leaning into something that actually is less significant for our business.
Okay. Shai, do you want to add something on this one, or do you want to move to the next question?
I can quickly add that we try to identify the different use cases that we solve, and we build some kind of a metrics that we want to be extremely successful in at least 2 use cases and average in another 2 use cases. And so it was like a metrics that we wanted to measure how many use cases we are really good at solving with our customers.
The next question from Miriam. Our customer health score is currently manually driven by CSM sentiment. Do other businesses have relationship manager leaning in, updating customer health?
My previous organization did that. I think there is definitely a place for success managers' sentiment. They know things and they have a gut feeling, or they have relationships that I don't think you can measure with data. So I do think it's important. There's definitely, the thing that I have found challenging with it is there's a fine balance between either over relying on it or asking a success manager to be compliant in completing that every month, 2 months. And if you have a large base of customers, that might be an awful lot of manual updating to keep it current, and old sentiment is worse than no sentiment in some cases, I think.
Good. The next one from Yara is, can you please speak about the challenge of collecting the data or importing it to the platform, create the data sources that the health platform will use?
Yeah, so it is challenging. To have all of the events that you want to track and all of the different data sources. So I think that you need to start again with something. Maybe the first indication will be when was the last login, and then you can incorporate more and more events. It depends on the platform that you use. If you use a tool that actually takes the events directly from your product, this is one thing. If it's a tool that you need to send like reports and like a scheduler, this is another thing. Eventually, if most of your information is in your CRM, try to enrich this CRM with more and more data points, and then you can create a health score formula or health score integration with the customer success platform. It is challenging, I have to say, but you need to take it one piece at a time. So start with something and then expand it.
Dave, do you want to add something about the challenging to collect data?
I would echo everything Shachar said. It's for us probably a little easier as we're using our own platform to collect the data, and it's data we already have access to. But we do also have very good support from our product and engineering teams in building internal sources as well, which has been crucial. But yeah, nothing extra to add.
I do want to add just one little thing, that some of the data that we need to collect is based on the CSM updating the CRM. So this is something that might be more manageable to build like the relevant fields on the relevant process to update them, and this is a big portion of the health score.
So the next one, I like this one. How do you look after your champions?
This is a hard one, because I think hopefully for a lot of champions, they will realize that being successful with our tool and platform makes them successful in their role. So I think if we can communicate that, I've seen other programs work very well. I've seen sort of point systems and reward systems that can be built that if a champion does X amount of actions, then they get rewarded with something. But for us, we give our champions access to maybe senior stakeholders in our business that they might not get otherwise, which to them and their line manager or their line manager's line manager might make them look more effective or good in their role. But it's a hard one, because for me, I think they are crucial. Our champions are really crucial to us in getting budget and economic buyers bought in. But yeah, we try as much as possible to use our tool and product as a way to help sort of enhance that person's standing in the organization or career.
Shachar, in your organization, how do you look after your champions? Did you flag them or tag them or?
So in my previous companies that I've worked at, all of the product wasn't relying on many users. It was on one or between 1 to 5 users that they managed it. So it was much more easier to manage. So all of the users that we had were our champions.
Then when using CSM to ask the question, how happy are you? Is there a risk of relationship bias? But it's interesting. It's a good question. Would it be beneficial for an external colleague to ask instead?
Probably yes to both. There is a risk. We typically do take multiple scores from larger accounts. So we will ask multiple people. To be completely honest, with the culture we have for that score, we do try and ask the more difficult contacts at our customers because we know it's probably a truer reflection of challenges. Nobody is compensated against this score. So I would say that. So in terms of a success manager's desire to lean into people they're closer to, it doesn't happen as much. We do on our projects, implementation projects or optimization projects. Those teams also ask for a project chi score. They do get taken by an external colleague. So the project manager that leads that implementation, because they're compensated against that, they don't take that score. The success manager does, or somebody else from Sprinklr does. So yeah, I think they are best placed to take the score because they know the customer and they're in the meeting. But yeah, we do occasionally have external people take it, but yeah, it's not normally a huge issue.
Okay. And Shah, in your organization, previous organization, or maybe the current one, do you have any external colleagues, not CSM, but someone else asking?
Not external colleague, but maybe when we sent the NPS, it was from more like general user, maybe the VP success or something like that. But the follow-up was done by the CSM.
Good. The next question is about a step-by-step, and maybe that's going to be the last question, a step-by-step approach or a methodology that you have. Do you have one, or something that it's test and learn thing?
Yeah, so I actually have a 4-step cycle in order to build a customer health model. The first one will be to define the customer's profile that you want to build a health score on. So it could be like one profile, it could be onboarding ongoing, it could be based on tiers. After you define the customer profiles, to each profile, define the actual customer health score metrics based on the 4 dimensions that we use. After that, you define the metrics, build relevant follow-up items or call to actions or best practices to each metric. And then for me, the most important part is the retrospection and the analysis and to measure the efficiency of the health score. And then once you have all of the 4 and you're ready for the next version, then it's a cycle that you need to do all over.
Good. Perfect. Thank you so much. Anything you would like to add on health score, Dave or Shar? Anything that you mentioned? Start simple. You can always start somewhere. You have data internally, even if you don't have, you can import a lot of data from your product. Anything else you would like to share on customer health scores?
Yeah, I was just reading some discussion in the chat about kind of the importance of health and whether it is a guide. And I think for me, the crucial thing is exactly that. The health score itself isn't going to take any action most of the time. So I think it's how do you take that health score and what call to actions do you have, or what behaviors do you want to influence with the health score? And that's the crucial bit for me. If the health score's super low or super high, middle, what do you do with that? How do you build a playbook or actions around that? And that to me is the most important part. So that's the thing I would focus on with that rich data you build through your health score.
Good. Shah, anything you would like to share before we end?
Just to echo what Dave said, build the health score in a way that it will not be like a black box that you don't know how to, what to do with the health score. So you need to build it in a way that the CSM can understand the metrics and do the things in order to improve it.
Perfect. Thank you so much both for joining, and thank you so much for sharing your experience about customer health scores. There will be other sessions about customer health scores in January. So Marika is going to do a webcast about customer health scores, and there will be also a masterclass. So in Jan as well, by the end of January. And if you're not part of the Customer Success Network, please join our network to continue this conversation. And I wish you all a very nice week, and please take care. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.